Liberal candidate Paul Chiang resigned after allegations surfaced that he urged handing Conservative candidate Jay Tay to China for a bounty.
A taxpayer advocacy group is warning that Mark Carney's plan to make the government a housing developer will only make the market riskier and more expensive.
Conservative commentator Ben Shapiro opposed U.S. tariffs on Canada, backing Premier Danielle Smith's fight for Alberta's economy. Hello, Canada. It's Wednesday, April 2nd, and this is the True North Daily Brief. I'm Cosmin, Dzsurdzsa.
And I'm Alex Zoltan.
We've got you covered with all the news you need to know. Let's discuss the top stories of the day and the True North exclusives you won't hear anywhere else. Liberal candidate Paul Chiang has announced he is stepping aside following allegations that he called for Conservative candidate Jay Tay to be handed over to Communist China in exchange for a bounty. The announcement comes hours after the RCMP told the state broadcaster CBC News that they are currently investigating whether his remarks violated Canadian law. Meanwhile, Liberal leader Mark Carney refused to fire him after being confronted on the issue by the media. Chiang announced this morning that he is stepping aside as the Liberal candidate in Markham, Unionville. In a statement, he said, quote, "With so much at stake for Canadians, I do not want there to be distractions in this critical moment. That's why I'm standing aside as our 2025 candidate in our community of Markham, Unionville." The explosive report by the Toronto Association for Democracy in China alleges that Chiang, who was running for re-election in his riding, was quoted in a Chinese-language media outlet allegedly suggesting that somebody, quote, can claim the $1 million bounty if they brought Tay to Toronto's Chinese consulate. National security experts, opposition figures, and Chinese dissidents have condemned the alleged comments. Chiang allegedly made the comments to the CCP-funded Hong Kong-based outlet Ming Pao. Tay, the Conservative candidate running in Don Valley West, has been a vocal critic of the Chinese Communist Party, and reports have indicated the Chinese authorities have placed a bounty on him. So, Alex, I can't imagine that Mark Carney wants this story to continue to be propagated in the media, but this does seem to be the huge news of this week. And his response, his initial response to Paul Chiang was to essentially stand by him, calling it a misstep, instead of a indication of a deeper way that he views the world. And to me, it indicates disregard for Canada's customs, for our laws, to suggest that somehow we are this Wild West state where you can just hand people over for bounties put on their heads by other countries. So with that in mind, Alex, how have other federal leaders reacted to this story?
Well, all of the other federal leaders, the major ones I should say, which be the major parties, of course, the NDP, the Conservatives, and the Bloc, have all called it out as an abomination and as completely unacceptable. I think the most interesting commentary I have heard, though, was from people that are within the diaspora who deal with the same type of threats that John Tay deals with. I spoke to one yesterday. He was a pro-democracy advocate on behalf of Hong Kongers in Vancouver. And I had reached out to ask if there were going to be any protests occurring in the near future in Vancouver related to this incident. And he said that there have been fewer and fewer protests in Vancouver over the years because people are becoming more and more fearful, not just of government intrusion from communist China, but also from the lack of protection they receive from their government and from the police. And this is a quote I received from him yesterday. He says, what happened with Paul Chiang, it's definitely undoing a lot of the government's efforts to deal with foreign interference. We already have a lot of mistrust, and seeing fewer people show up to protest is a reflection of that mistrust. And so I think that that's a more relevant commentary maybe than anything from the party leaders. A taxpayer group is raising the alarm about Liberal leader Mark Carney's housing plan. Carney held a press conference in Vaughan, Ontario, where he promised to double the pace of housing construction to 500,000 new homes per year by creating a government entity to act as a developer for affordable homes and to provide financing for prefabricated modular homes. Carney promised to work with provinces and municipalities to cut development charges in half by 2030 for multi-housing units, committing to providing municipalities funds for lost revenue. He also promised to keep and reinforce the Trudeau government's Housing Accelerator Fund, a very controversial policy widely panned for its inefficacy. Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Franco Terrazzano, urged the government to get out of the way of builders. I really like this quote. He said, "If more government was the solution to the housing crisis, then every Canadian would have 2 homes by now." Terrazzano added that the federal government already has a corporation dedicated to housing, the CMHC, or the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation. He criticizes the Crown Corporation for failing to achieve its goal of housing affordability for all, while also dishing out $132 million in bonuses to CMHC staff since 2020. Carney has already committed to eliminating the goods and services tax on first-time homebuyers on homes under $1 million, a policy remarkably similar to Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre's commitment to axe the federal sales tax on newly built homes, which he unveiled nearly 6 months ago. Poilievre has since upped the commitment to axe the GST on newly built homes up to $1.3 million. So, Cosmin, where does Canada stand with regard to housing availability today? And are we building enough homes for people? And what can the government do or not do to solve this problem?
I think what's often overlooked with housing is that nobody and no federal leader yet has really touched on and hammered home how much mass immigration has contributed to this problem. There was a recent study that came out by the Aristotle Foundation, and they found that the rate of housing completions, when you compare it to the amount of people we're bringing in every single year, and I would like to remind people that when you're a new immigrant, you need a house over your head. You will be on the market for the rental market, most likely. Most immigrants who arrive to Canada are not buying homes right away. While that might be a longer term goal, and it might have actually been like a realistic goal back in the day, currently that's not the case. They're essentially entering the rental market in major metropolitan areas. But when it comes to actually the construction of homes in Canada, and I'm quoting these figures from the Aristotle Foundation. So in 2021, there were 3 people per house built. By 2023, there were 5 people arriving per house built. So we're talking about essentially families arriving every single day, every single year, and we're not fulfilling the needs of new arrivals, but also the people who already live in Canada who are seeking houses for themselves.
I would agree completely with what you had to say, and also with what Terrazzano at the Canadian Taxpayer Federation had to say as well. I worked in banking for many years before I started in reporting, and I saw more and more government regulation over the time that I worked as a lender and a mortgage lender in particular. And I only saw housing prices go up more. So I believe that less government intervention is probably better than more at this point.
U.S. conservative political commentator Ben Shapiro has voiced his opposition to tariffs on Canadian goods after meeting Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. Shapiro's support for Canada drew praise from Smith as she continues her efforts to protect Alberta's economy in the ongoing U.S.-Canada trade war. Despite not agreeing on everything, she said common ground was found. The tariff war is bad for the United States and Canada. Shapiro is the founder of the Daily Wire, which the premier has cited as having a reach of 220 million monthly followers. He has 25 million followers on his own social media platforms. Journalist David Staples said this is the second largest audience of anyone in Trump's base. Americans are giving U.S. President Donald Trump the benefit of the doubt, said Shapiro, as he's following through on many of his campaign promises. However, Shapiro noted that if the economy faltered, so too would the rest of his agenda. Despite Americans disliking the tariffs, Shapiro said the rest of Trump's agenda is highly popular. Before Smith met with Shapiro in Florida to discuss the tariffs, he had previously been outspoken against imposing tariffs on Canada, an ally instead of China, a geopolitical enemy. Alberta NDP leader Nahi Nenshi complained about Smith meeting with Shapiro, labeling him as a, quote, extremist. These tariffs have already been in place for quite some time now, and there's a way, Alex, how are the tariffs actually affecting both Canada's and the United States economies?
Well, tariffs always affect economies. Tariffs have been around for a very long time. They're nothing new. And generally, tariffs are not good for people, people being consumers. Tariffs are taxes, and they're actually punitive taxes designed to change behavior. So that behavior might be, for instance, to favor domestic manufacturing over importing a good from another country. And in that sense, they're very economically and principally analogous to the carbon tax. The carbon tax was a tax put on consumers to change behavior. Tariffs are very much the same. And so I think that Pierre Poilievre opposing tariffs is logically consistent. And I'm impressed that he took that and charted that course, even though it was very unpopular with many conservatives who agreed with the spirit of why Trump instituted the tariffs in the first place.
That's it for today, folks. Thanks for tuning in. You can stay on top of new episodes every weekday by subscribing to the Daily Brief on iTunes and Spotify. Also, while you're at it, make sure to hit us with a 5-star rating and please leave a review.